point then of having different decks? If we already know what the cards mean without having to see them, what is the point in having different illustrated decks? Dream a little dream of me. Welcome kindreds, it's Jessica the Story Witch, and I've got a tarot video here for you today. It's one that I promised a while back, and this is kind of thanks to Beth because I'd kind of forgotten. So this is for you, Beth. The video is going to be about non-standard interpretation, or kind of moving beyond the standard interpretation of tarot cards. This is kind of just my personal feelings on it and what I like to do and what I think is important and useful. Not that I'm saying that this is how other people should do it or this is the only way to do it in any way, shape or form, but I hope that it's going to be useful, especially if you are looking to kind of just move up your readings from being more you know, this is what this card means, this is what this card means, and not being able to, it's kind of to take it to the next level. That is what I am aiming to do in this video anyway, helping you to take your readings to the next level. What do I mean by going beyond the standard meanings? Basically, when you learn tarot, quite often you were taught perhaps a numerological approach, which is especially useful when you're using something like Tarot de Marseille, or certain decks that don't have very pictorial representations on the minors, on the pip cards. We learn that like aces are always beginnings, and like fives are kind of like difficult energy, and tens are completion of a cycle, you know, that kind of thing. We learn what the numerological representation of that thing means, and we also learn the elemental correspondences for those things, so that we know that like wands are to do with creativity, or perhaps to do with career, and we learn that like cups are to do with our emotions and perhaps relationships, you know, that kind of thing. So we use our knowledge of the element and the numerology to inform our understanding of the cards, and that goes for whatever system that we are using. And then we will learn that the Hermit represents a kind of going within to find the bigger truth without, and also like shining our light in the world even if it feels like it's only a very small light, that kind of thing, you know. Whereas the Chariot is much more like steering a path through the world, being much more visible, and also like trying to navigate between two perhaps opposing directions. So what we begin to have is like layers of understanding of the cards. We have the numerological, we have the elemental, and then we have the kind of the standard meanings of those cards. And the more that you use the cards, you build up a bank and understanding of those standard meanings, so much so that you don't even need to necessarily see the cards to get a grasp on the meaning of that card. You know, if somebody says to you Four of Pentacles, you'll instantly start thinking of kind of like holding on kind of energy, perhaps like sometimes selfish kind of energy or stagnant kind of energy. You know, you don't need to see the card necessarily to know that, because you've learnt those meanings, you've learnt those standard meanings. You know, use the cards. If you use the cards every day, you begin to build up this bank of standard meanings. And going back to the whole debate of whether you read the book or you don't read the book, I am very much of the opinion that the best way of going about it is that when, like, say you're doing a daily draw and you draw a card, the first thing I feel like you should do is you ideally write down, but at least sort of tell yourself what you feel like that card means. Get the impression of what that card is and what it means to you for that particular draw that you've done that day. Then look at the book, and that probably the book that comes with the deck is the first port of call. It might not be. Some of the books that come with decks are quite rubbish, and I'm going to be talking about a little bit of that as well in a little bit. And then, especially when you're a beginner, it can be useful to then look at another book's take on the same card, a more like generic book. So something like something like Rachel Pollack's Tarot Wisdom book, or Paul Fenton Smith does very good books on like the meanings of the cards, the kind of standard meanings of the cards. So it doesn't matter whether you're using the Rider-Waite-Smith, the Pamela Coleman-Smith illustrated deck, or if you're using something that is being like evolved from that, like something like Green Witch or something like that. That will give you more options of what that card could mean. So those things are getting layered up, you know. Now we've got even more layers. We've got the elemental correspondence, we've got the numerological correspondence, we've got the standard meaning, we have got our own interpretation of the standard meaning, we have got perhaps one or two or even more books interpretations of the standard meaning. And by doing that, you're layering up, like I say, all of these different bits of information. You will come to a place where somebody could say the name of a tarot card and you will know what it means. I do think that for beginners it is better to stick with one deck for a good length of time before like trying to use lots of different decks, because sometimes it can be more, it can mean that your understanding becomes a little bit superficial. But I really do feel like having at least sort of like 4 or 5 decks that are quite different from each other, although I'm quite guilty of buying quite similar decks again and again. But you know, if you've got different decks and different interpretations of each artist, each deck creator gives their own spin of that meaning. So every time you use a different deck by a different creator, it gives you more options for the meaning of that card, or perhaps not necessarily more options, but like expanded options of what that card could mean. And also, especially with decks, things like, I've pulled out Everyday Witch to show you because that is a deck that I think illustrates my point quite well. Is that there will be cards, there'll be things in the cards, especially of like more modern decks, that are perhaps reflective of the modern world. Things like maybe like mobile phones or cars or motorbikes or things like that. And they can help us to find meaning in our everyday lives, cued from the pictures. So what my understanding of how tarot works is that it is like a kind of prompt to our unconscious, our kind of collective unconscious, which is where we know what we need to know. So the cards are like a kind of a way of accessing that information. They're just one way, you know. You can use runes, you can just literally tap into that unconscious, but that is more difficult to do, and that is why using cards is a really good way into doing it. And even if you don't agree with that why that works like that, or your understanding of why tarot works is different, then that doesn't matter. However it works, they give us clues as to meaning. So let's have a little look at Everyday Witch. Let's try and find some examples. So with this deck, this is quite a modern deck, and the cards are very recognisable to, what I should have done probably is pull out a traditional Rider-Waite-Smith to compare with it, so I'm sorry I haven't done that. But you can see that the cards are similar to what you would, trying to find a way of showing it, to what you would see in the traditional deck, but they're not the same. And the differences are what can open up more possibilities for different meanings and different readings. So like, you know, there's 10 of Cups. In the traditional Rider-Waite-Smith, the 10 of Cups, we have the kind of family standing under the rainbow with the cups, you know, whereas this one looks more like a family picnic. It's not super modern, you know, the styling of this deck is still stylized, obviously, you know, and you can get all different types of decks. You can get like photoreal decks if you like that. I don't particularly like that kind of style of deck. But the cups are around the table here. And so that gives us a different meaning, even though lots of the elements are still there, like the family all being together, like the kind of couple being the focal point for the family. There are differences. like, you know, this card, you could draw this card and you could say, okay, this is to do with like a family. If you drew the traditional Rider-Waite-Smith card, you'd be like, oh, it's, you know, it's showing like a lovely family time, a really good thing like that. But or you could draw this take on the Ten of Cups and you could say you're going to be going on a picnic, or you're going to have like a family reunion picnic. You know, do you see what I mean? Even though that's a subtle difference, it is offering, there's no hint of picnic in the Rider-Waite-Smith version of the card, but by showing that, it gives us that instead. With the Queen of Wands here, you know, the Queen of Wands traditionally would be sitting on her throne. Here she is actually like sat on a dragon, which looks like it is only vaguely tamed. It's allowing her to sit there, but not necessarily for any super length of time. You know, she has it under control, but perhaps it might choose to not be under control a little bit later on. So what does that mean for our reading of the cards? Well, in the traditional card, we might say, you know, the Queen of Wands, she is a creative powerhouse. She is secure and solid in her identity as a creatrix, as somebody who has an idea and makes it happen. Whereas here we might say you are this person who is, you know, she's holding a bouquet of flowers, she's dressed in a very gorgeous way, she has her wand up and ready. So perhaps she is somebody who has created these wonderful things. She has definitely done very dangerous feats, taming a dragon, and she's been presented with a bouquet of flowers for her work. So it is somebody who is accomplished. She is a creatrix still. She's an adventurer. She shows more adventure in this card, I feel, than in the traditional Rider-Waite-Smith. But also that perhaps you don't feel that position is necessarily secure, because that dragon, which could be like an internal aspect of yourself as well, is always threatening to kind of fly away or even attack. You know, it doesn't look like it's going to attack to me. It looks like it's going to fly away more than anything. So the actual pictures on the cards give you that extra information or a different reading. So often I see with beginner readers that they will use the standard meaning of the cards. It wouldn't matter what deck they were using, as long as they had those standard meanings, they would only draw on those rather than looking at the details of the card that is in front of them. So that is what I mean by going beyond the standard meanings. If you've chosen to use a deck, you've chosen to use that deck, so use it. Use what is in those pictures to inform your reading. So Page of Cups. Page of Cups is traditionally, you know, standard meaning. Page of Cups, it could be a new love interest, it could be a child, it could be quite most often it's portrayed as kind of like a new love interest, possibly a Pisces or something that is coming your way. So whereas this interpretation of the card is showing an artist, it's showing somebody who is not afraid to experiment, who has like kind of cast off their outer garments and just got really dirty and got their hands into what they're doing. And so, you know, that card, the reading of that card would, even though you've got that standard meaning, you are bringing that forward, the reading of this card opens up the possibility of you saying to the querent, or, you know, if it's yourself, of saying creative play, whereas that is not necessarily what is being offered in the traditional read of the cards. Yeah, and this is a great one actually. Temperance here. You know, the traditional Temperance card, we have the you know, that kind of pouring, that the flow and balance of things in a more kind of angelic and religious almost sense, you know, in that, like, in a spiritually evolved, balanced kind of way. And how fun that in this deck we have a kind of yogi doing tree pose, you know, so it's like a person is funny, is taken on that spiritual evolution of the Temperance card, and given us the opportunity to read into it, to connect with it more even, you know, as something that's much more achievable. I love that she has like one eye open, one eye closed. And like I can see why that might be indicative of balance, and perhaps that is what the illustrator intended when they were creating this card. But to me, it almost looks like she's peeping, and to me, this shows the kind of impossibility of achieving perfect balance between everything in our lives, even though we are really trying to. And also it shows somebody who is kind of perhaps trying to present an illusion of being balanced and spiritually aware, and perhaps not being quite as balanced and spiritually aware as they would like you to think that they are. Do you see what I mean? So it allows us to read those things into the cards and look for details as well. Look for details in the background. Look for details in the colours as well of things that are in the decks that you like to use, because quite often there's most definitely a reason why we are drawn to the decks that we're drawn to, and it's because we find more meaning in those pictures than we do in other decks. I did say I was going to talk a little bit about guidebooks, and I am going to, because like I say, I feel like the best approach is to go from your own intuition first, then the guidebook for the deck next, then a more general guidebook next, potentially, and then, you know, you can even go even further, look at more guidebooks, look at articles or whatever and things on that particular card if you want to. That is a really good way of hooking into a meaning. And like I say, sometimes they'll have really mundane meanings, like sometimes the Justice card will come up and it's to do with fairness and blah, you know, and all this kind of thing. Sometimes the Justice card will come up and perhaps the Justice and the Chariot, or like Justice and Knight of Wands will come up, and it will indicate that you need to watch your speed, or you're going to get a speeding ticket. You know, it can be that mundane sometimes, and so you can look for the details in the deck that you're using. And sometimes this doesn't become clear until afterwards, obviously, because you won't know that that's going to happen until the end of the day, which is why if you do a daily draw, it is good to re-look at that card at the end of the day and see how that fitted in with what happened in the day. So going back to the guidebooks, there are certain decks where the guidebook I feel like is not that much help, and one of those decks is the Wild Unknown. I love this deck. I love it so much, and I feel like this deck, because it has such minimal, I wouldn't say it's necessarily Rider-Waite-Smith based. It's kind of like on the borderline between Rider-Waite-Smith and Tarot de Marseille. Anya Esmond actually kind of opened my eyes to that, and she's got some good videos about this deck too. But I feel like the kind of almost spare, kind of sparse, you know, like there's literally nothing on the cards, nothing extra on the cards, but that almost leaves like a really good big juicy gap for your intuition to jump into. And I know like some people hate reading with this card, reading with this deck, they just can't really get anything out of it. They love how it looks, but they can't read with it. And I think that is because sometimes people will block their intuition, or it's perhaps just obviously some people who are very experienced might try and read with this deck and they just don't like it. Sometimes that happens, you just don't get on well with a particular deck. But I feel like a lot of the time with this deck in particular is that it attracts newbies because it is so gorgeous and kind of aesthetically pleasing and Instagrammable. But it's not the easiest deck to read with because it is so sparse. It doesn't necessarily give you a lot to work with. Look, there's another Devil card there, and we've got like a goat with the feet on fire. And what I find with this deck is because it's majority black and white, is like where there is colour, there is it's for good reason, and so it draws your attention in. So like this, you can read it as a devil, you can read it as you know, you would layer in your understanding of the Devil card obviously into this card, but it doesn't look like there's any kind of temptation or anything going on here. If anything, it looks more like strength and protection, but with those feet on fire, it's almost like hot foot. And it reminds me, like in my personal kind of understanding of things, of that kind of hot foot, almost like voodoo type. It might mean that somebody is perhaps trying to like move, you need to move on from a situation. You've got to get your feet moving and out, away from a particular situation. But in the book, let's see what it says actually about the devil in the book. Like I said, I don't use this book very much because I find it to be quite rubbish. It's got hardly anything about each card. And so they say for the devil, addiction, negativity. Though it may feel frightening, whereas like I said, I don't see addiction or necessary negativity in that picture. Though it might feel frightening when the devil appears in your reading, this card carries an urgent message. I do see urgency in this card, and must be interpreted with total honesty. The darkness of the devil card takes the form of addiction, negativity, or materialism. It can indicate an ugly relationship with a person or substance. Identify this dependency and how it's holding you back. The devil's hooves are strong and relentless. Their grip will not loosen unless a conscious change is made. Free yourself. Okay, so while I don't feel like the write-up in this book actually matches the pictures, it doesn't draw details out of the pictures. Very rarely does it even mention what is on the card, and that is why I don't feel like it is like one of the most unhelpful guidebooks that you will find with a tarot deck, or that I've found with any of the decks that I've got. Most definitely, like I say, it gives me that hot foot feel. It makes me feel like you've got to get out, and also be protected, be safe, because of the pentacle that is there. But it doesn't make me feel, it doesn't, for me, bring up anything about addiction, negativity, or materialism. Although, obviously, addiction, negativity, and materialism are aspects of the standard meaning of the devil card. So, while I love the imagery in this card, and I feel like it does offer lots of possibility for going beyond the standard meanings and reading in and allowing your intuition to fill in the gaps, the book doesn't help you with that. Whereas, like, say a book like, I haven't got the deck out with me now, but the Shadowscapes Companion, when this talks about a card, it has a full size, sorry, the light is just not good for this, it has a full page picture of each of the cards, even for the minors, and then it talks about the picture. So for this particular card, which is the sun, this is just where I flicked open to. In a flare of liquid gold that pours across the sky, the sun rises. It is the brilliant star of day, banishing the thin and wispy light of his night-bound siblings and the rich glow of dawn. The king of the birds emerges from his slumbering roost as the morning mist rises in hazy waves from the dew-dampened ground. His feathers gleam iridescent under dawn's rosy palette of warmth-tinged light. His companion mounts, and together they set wing across the lands of their domain. They glide across the valleys, hearing the songs rise from the workers in the fields. They soar up high and taunt the mountain tops with an elusive brush of wingtips across the upper peaks. The denizens of the day trail in an entourage of avian delight. They pour across the sky, trailing after the sun in the arc of its journey to the western horizon. And then there's a poem. They don't have a poem for the minors, only for the majors. But for the majors, they have that extra bit of information. And then there's a whole chunk on the actual meaning as well, which is not massive, but it gives lots of possibility for the meaning, which feeds off the description of the actual picture in the card, you know. So, like I say, I should have pulled out the actual deck as well to show you. But that, I mean, it was beautiful to listen to read in the first place. But it is giving you information about the picture in the card. And it is the pictures which allow us to take details that elevate our meaning from the standard meaning of the Sun card as being a very positive card, of being a card of possibility and joy and fun. And you know, those are all meanings of the card, but then by bringing in that kind of bird king and having him kind of soar up to the sky, and like it talks about things in the description that isn't even in the card, is adding even more around the picture, which can give you even more information. So like if you had this deck and this guidebook and you didn't read the guidebook, you would be missing out on a lot of possibility. Just to give you an example of what it says for the meaning of this card, which is the Sun card. So, you know, like I say, we know the standard meaning, and here it says enlightenment and understanding, glory, achieving prominence, the constant renewal of life, vitality, filled with radiant joy and energy, invigoration and good health, being full of assurance and confidence, a clarity of vision and purpose lit by the clear daylight. So see, it's referencing what is actually happening in the card too, as well as being more generally about the sun. From the times of ancient civilizations up to the present, the sun has always been a symbol of life and growth. It has been embodied in vibrant gods and goddesses in cultures throughout the ages, young and glorious and brilliant, full of vigor and blazing splendor. The strength and power of the gods pours forth in the nourishing glow of the sun. So it doesn't say, it goes beyond what we would say the standard interpretation of that card is. And like I say, then you can look into the details of that card to read even more, to glean even more meaning out of that card. So I hope that makes sense and you understand what I mean. Just try it out, especially with daily draws, because that is something that there's not too many cards on the table, it doesn't get too confusing. If in the morning you take your daily draw card, actually look at the imagery of the card and perhaps even try and describe what you can see in the card, especially little details, because those little details are the things that are sometimes like a trigger to give us more information than we can get from the standard meaning. So like there might be in a card, like it might be something kind of insignificant in a way, like a kind of plate of delicious grapes or something like that, and then later on in the day you might be presented with a plate of grapes and you can see that then in the card, and that then adds to the bank of meaning of that particular card. So that's a very kind of like mundane example, but it happens all the time if you're observant and if you just take note of what is there in the cards. And then, like I say, it then expands your understanding of that card. And every new deck you use, which has got these different pictures on, and like, you know, you really get to know and understand that take of the card, you then are able to layer that on to the other things that you use as well. But always look at what is actually being presented, because there's a reason why you've drawn that card. Look at the details, look at the card, describe it, and then later on at the end of the day come back to it and see if or what in your day has matched up with that card or not, you know, or not matched up with it. But I really feel that more things will match than don't. So I hope that has been useful. If you would like me to do more kind of tarot videos like this, then let me know as well, and I will try to do my best to do that. If you've got any topics or anything like that you'd like me to cover, then I will do my best to do that. Warmest blessings. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you very soon.